Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wet plate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wet plate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silverbath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 questions. In this episode, I've asked a Colorado photographer to sit down with me who seems to have a thing for hats. And no, I'm not just talking to myself here, but another Colorado resident that's been involved with photography for over 40 years. He's also one of the few people that owns and operates a fairly new natural light tintype studio to capture beautiful portraits of his sitters. Based just down I-25 for me in Salida, Colorado, I'd like to welcome Tim Brown to 10 Questions. Hey, Tim, how's it going?
Excellent. Thanks for having me here.
Great. Tim, I'm not sure how we ended up starting in wet plate, probably within a few years of each other. We live less than 4 hours apart, and we've never had the chance to meet face to face.
Yeah,
Kind of
I
funny.
hear you. Well, Fort Collins is far away, 4 hours.
Yeah. So, Tim, you grew up on the East Coast, right?
I did.
Okay, whereabouts?
Born in Boston, kind of raised there for majority of my life. My family moved down to Rhode Island before I left and came out to Colorado, so that's kind of where they're at now. But yeah, New England.
How did you end up in Colorado?
Well, I was very much into photography, even at a young age. My dad had cameras all the time. He wasn't a photographer, but just loved photography, and that spurred my interest, just seeing his amazing mechanical 1960s and 70s cameras, and that got me into it. And so when I was like 14, I got my first camera, and by 16 I had a darkroom in the basement, and I was just doing it as a hobby. And I was into the outdoors a lot too, and a friend of mine who was a raft guide here in Salida told me about a company that photographs the tourist, going through the rapids. And of course, being a homeboy from Boston, like, really? Like, I could take pictures in the Rocky Mountains of Whitewater? And it was amazing. It got me out here. And I did that just for the first season. Then decided to go out on my own, doing something similar, just because I wanted to be more creative and all that. And pretty much did that for, still doing a decent amount of travel and all that. But pretty much wet plate is, at this point, 95% of my business.
Right. What was it about this art form at that early age that kind of piqued your interest as a possible career choice?
Well, I mean, photography is just an amazing thing. So many people like it. And again, I got way into my dad's cameras. He did Polaroids forever, and then when he got a Nikon F2, that's when I was like, whoa, look at this thing, just the mechanics of it, and just the weight and the sharp lens, and looking through the viewfinder was just magic to me. So I just got into it. I grew up on a lake in a pretty remote area, so I was very influenced by nature. But really, I just love creating. I did a lot of black and white at first, as I mentioned, a dark room, and just the process of developing and printing was really cool. Fun.
Cool.
So,
What was your first exposure to wet plate photography?
well, I've been doing it for about 7 years, and although during my career, because I shot film forever, I did a decent amount of darkroom work and color commercial work, or even just black and white creatively. But then I, being a commercial photographer, I evolved into digital and just went along with that, and it was okay. But at one point, I think it was Facebook maybe, but I started following just a person or some people that were posting wet plate images, and I didn't even know what they were. I just loved the look. I knew it was old, and just didn't know much about it. But I probably at least a year or two. Just you just follow things, you like it,
Right.
and it ended up being Quinn Jacobson. And at that time he was living in Denver, and I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. And so fast forward another year, I purchased a business a property in downtown Salida, like a storefront, and renovated it, made a studio out of it. I lived in the back with my kids, and it took me 2 years to renovate it. It was like a historic, late 1800s building, just beautiful brick, great location. And when it was getting close to my opening, I wanted to do something different, just something special for the opening, not necessarily meaning that I'm going to do this for a living, but just do something different. So I thought maybe I'll find out about this wet plate thing, see what it takes to learn and all that. So called Quinn, and he teaches weekend workshops, and they were pretty pricey, like 1,500 or something. So of
Yeah.
course I was like, do I want to do this enough? Is it worth it for me to just, am I going to like it? So literally I think it was another year. I was like, well, maybe not now. I'm just busy, whatever. But then I was like, I'm going to do it. So I signed up, and it was great. It was like one-on-one. And literally the first 20 minutes I was in it, I was like, this is where I am meant to be.
Nice.
Even before he went downstairs and started doing stuff, just Quinn talking about the process and why he does it. And it just was like I resonated and aligned with it so well. And I was stoked. And after 2 days, I was like, this is it, man. So.
It's a pretty interesting arc that you've taken as far as starting with film, going into digital, and then now you're going back, 160 years prior to that from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. It's something you never think of, in your career, or, with photography especially. It's like, you're moving forward and digital, and digital's just changing all the time. You have to upgrade equipment and software, and it wasn't. I didn't really. I liked it, but I have to admit I was getting a little like, all of a sudden you're sitting in kind of front of the computer all the time, and I loved film for sure, uh, and digital just wasn't thrilling me, and I was also really losing a lot of clients. Like, I had an amazing career, but every other person was becoming a photographer, and one by one, a lot of my, I was just losing clients because they could find their friend to do it for free, or somebody who charged cheaper, or whatever.
Right.
So that was kind of concerning me, and I just really wasn't feeling inspired, even though I was doing well. But yeah, so when I took that workshop, it was just the perfect timing. And Salida is a historic railroad town, so it was really perfect for that too. It's like it's an 1880s railroad town, so like how good is that?
Nice.
And yeah, so I had my opening, and a ton of people came, and I'd created all these portraits, and I was selling kind of like selling gift certificates for tintypes to see if I get some interest, and I kind of kicked ass. I sold a ton, and that kind of got me going.
That's great.
Now the space I had was not natural light. It was just a typical building in the middle of a bunch of other buildings downtown. So I had to use only flash, which was fine. I love flash. I still use it a lot, but as I evolved, I really wanted to take it to the next level. So I sold the property and bought a house only about a mile and a half outside of town, up on Methodist Mountain, with killer views, and with the plans of building a studio, which I finished about a year ago.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's talk about what happened, I guess, before you actually hooked up with Quinn and took the workshop. Had you attempted to make any wet plates prior to that, or were you pretty much?
Not at all.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I was busy for one thing, but also, I had no idea what the process was. I mean, there were tintypes, and at that point, I kind of knew what they were, and the era and all that, but I still don't know anything about the chemical process. I didn't really research it much. Again, I just liked it because of the outcome.
Right.
Um, I'm more of a visual person, like most photographers, and it wasn't as much about the process or the era or the history. It was more about like, wow, what a beautiful image the portraits these do is just amazing. Of course, doing the workshop and learning, then it was like icing on the cake that the process is just so cool and just so magical, and the fact that you can do it all out in the open, even developing film and black and white, other than printing, but when you're developing film, it's in a canister. You don't get to see it. You just pour a bunch of chemicals for 20 minutes, and out comes the film, and it's done. So it's just wonderful, but have it done right in front of you, you know, right in front of your eyes, and your hand pouring the chemicals, and of course the magic of the fixer and all that. So yeah, once I learned the process, and it was even better. And again with Quinn, once we did our first few portraits, and they came out of the cyanide, I was like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah. What do you remember about your first portrait?
Well, of course, it was with Quinn, and just sort of we photographed each other, kind of a self-portrait. And I do recall that I still have it, but it was dark, so, maybe I didn't do the developer long enough or whatever it was, but I was like, wow, this is pretty dark. And I kind of thought that at first, like that was as good as it was. I didn't realize just how well the tonal range was, and maybe the fact that I don't recall, but I think Quinn was like, "Yeah, great plate," and so I thought, "Okay, this is how they are." And then I went back to my studio and bought all the equipment, all the chemicals, and it probably took me, it seemed like a long time, at least 3 months, before I could get it down, just the pour and the temperature, and I had a lot of issues at the beginning. I mean, they weren't coming out that well, or they were dark or flat, whatever. So it took me a while, and you know how it is with wet plate. There's all these issues that come up, and you don't know what they are,
Oh
especially at
yeah.
the beginning. And you're pulling your hair out, and you're talking to your friends, and sometimes you find out you resolve it quick, and sometimes nobody knows what happened.
Yeah.
But I did remember I had one breakthrough day because I was photographing a bunch of friends, and I was probably about a month in. I was like, "What is going on? This isn't working." And what I did was I cooled down the developer. I think my developer was too warm. I was up, around 65 degrees or something. And maybe somebody I knew or somebody on the Bastards page was like, "Cool down your developer." And I did that, and all of a sudden everything changed. The image just came out great, bright, and I was like, "Whew." So that's when I really shifted gears, and then at that point I got my pores down, and I was like, "Okay, I'm ready to open this up to the public."
That's great. I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned, whenever you make that first plate, and I think a lot of us kind of, I'm going to say, suffer from this, is if we get any image at all, we're pretty happy about it, right? And we think,
Yeah.
wow, this is amazing. But if you can really put the time into it, you can really get some beautiful images once you get your technique down, and that's a big part of it. So,
Oh, it is, and actually, when I moved up here, I was going to build a studio and have it be kind of seamless, but COVID hit, and my business closed down. I was on unemployment, and I was still building the studio. I actually had to change the size of the studio because I was going to build it as a separate building, and I didn't have the money. I couldn't get a loan, but I did have some cash, so I went back to my architect, and we was like, "Can we put it on the house?" And we figured out a place to do it in the second story, and it worked really well. I'm really glad it did it because it's really cool. It's a cool part of the house. It's north facing, and it's right in the home, so it just works really well and saved me a bunch of money. It's just a neat space.
nice, nice.
But I guess what I was getting at too was, I was practicing a bunch during COVID, and I finally just, you know, did some studying and asking more questions, and finally started getting way better tones and all that. And I was doing classic things that people do at the beginning, like too contrasty, shooting too bright and underexposing, and at first I thought it was great because finally they're bright, they're not dark. But now, or actually a year or so ago, I've been starting like, okay, be patient. Let's go for the really nice tones. You don't have to have the contrast, and I've been getting just some beautiful tones, and also amazed at how the tonal range you can get with wet plate is pretty awesome. I didn't think it'd be that good. I thought, well, it's 1880s and whatever. It's as good as it was. And also the first 2 years of me shooting, I was now and then I get a good plate, but mostly I was getting these contrasty plates and just going with it. But you know, once you start experimenting more, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I
I
will
actually
say
had a
that's one thing that I've noticed in a lot of your plates, Tim, is that they do have this beautiful range of tones. There's not that stark. You can tell a lot of times, hey, this is definitely a flash right in the face kind of thing. And
yeah.
honestly, I wondered just how much of that was just because of the natural light that you've got access to now. So
Well, thanks. And there's times when I'll overdevelop it for 3 seconds, like and it looks fine to the client, but it's like there it is again. So I'm really just concentrating to do better and and make that effort. In some ways, I sort of got lazy. You get busy, you're doing it every day. Or that happened to me with my pores too. I had like a month or two, like weird. After doing this forever, like last spring, all of a sudden, like I was getting all these marks and lines, and I'm thinking it's the chemicals, and I'm isolating, testing all the chemicals. What happened? And they weren't going away. And I was like, maybe you should just test your pores and really make an effort to pour really good. And I've had a good pour, but it's like, what happened? And so I shot about 7 plates and just really, made an effort to flow it really well. And that was the issue. Like they all came out super clean. I was like,
uh,
oh, so it's like, yeah, that's the great thing about this process. It just keeps you on your toes. If you just slack off a little bit, all hell breaks loose and you're scratching your head because we know that, when you have a problem, no matter how much experience you have, you could be like, okay, what is it? Is it the temperature? Is it the fixer? Is it the developer? Is it my exposure? Or something? It could be a million things, and you might not even find out what it is. So it's like, oh no, here we go again.
yep, a
So,
lot of variables for sure.
yeah.
Tim, your
But anyway,
background seems to point towards a love of high adventure photography, like whitewater rafting and other kind of quick moving outdoor shots. What is it about portraits that you've come to love while shooting wet plate?
great question. I've always loved shooting people. I've, that's just been probably my favorite subject, even though the majority of my career was adventure travel. And so after my first year out here photographing rafts, I was like, I want to learn to kayak. And then I got way into rivers. I got good at boating, and there was really like 2 or 3 professional photographers that specialized in whitewater in the world. So it opened up a ton of clients for me, even though it's a small industry. But I got a kind of a name for myself because I could kayak difficult water and I had my cameras in the back, so it gave me my ability to boat gave me access to very remote places where I could get images that no one else could. So I did that for 20 years straight. Traveled year round, especially winters. I'd go overseas and kind of followed the rivers mostly, but also because you're going to amazing countries, mostly third world countries where there's mountains and adventure. I started photographing people and scenes and all that. But anyway, I've going back to what I said. I've always loved people. I love nature and all that, and even a beautiful landscape. It's like, oh, I want a person in it. So as my career progressed, I started getting more calls for just doing portraiture and started doing studio work just because I live in Salida. It, it's been growing a lot lately, like everywhere else in Colorado, but for a long time, Salida was just a ghost town. It was hard to make a living here, so I had to kind of do everything. So I got studio gear and started doing a lot of studio work, from shooting jewelry, people, just whatever. So I got pretty good at that. And for about 12 years, too, a while back, because it's a small town, the school system asked me to do their school portraits. The photos every fall. And I was like, really? I had kids in school, and I was like, okay, I'll try that. And I did it for about 14 years because it's fun, kind of basic, but super lucrative. And I didn't really see how much it would help me because I kind of had this attitude like, you can make good school portraits, but there's only so much room for being creative,
Right, right.
But the great thing was, when I would photograph a school, you're shooting like 400 or 500 kids in 4 hours. And so you have like 30 seconds to 1 minute per kid. And so after doing that year in and year out, it really would train your eye just to see the minute details in light and how light falls on people's faces and the shape and their posture and all these little things. And it was really cool the way by doing it so much, I had this eye for subtle differences in lighting and expression and getting people to relax and all that. And it really helped me a lot. And I love it because when I'm when I'm doing a tintype portrait now, I don't have 1 minute with them. I have them for an hour, so I can really take the time and really light very intricately and take time with their expression, and we have them relax because it's an intense thing having a tintype portrait done. I mean, most people, you put a camera up and we get self-conscious, whether it's an iPhone or a Nikon digital, whatever. And then when you're staring at this big brass lens, just a foot from you, and it's going to
Right.
be 2 seconds long, and you're being told, you're not smiling, but you want to look good. And most people are like, well, I have to smile. I'm happy. What do you mean? So to tell someone like, don't smile, relax, it's challenging, and people have to look inside, and if you're a little off or vibey or whatever, you're going to sort of upset them, and they're not going to be able to relax. So you really have to look inside yourself and be able to present yourself in a calm way so they're relaxed.
Right.
And I love that. I love the intimacy with people and what they experience and how they feel. And and then sometimes you're like, yeah, it's okay. Maybe you need to do a smile. Your relaxed look, you look pissed off and and old. So you know, I, it's always a historic thing. A tintype is, so part of it's like, well, whatever. Who cares how it comes out because it's a tintype. But I've been a photographer forever. It's hard for me to say, well, here's your crappy picture. Give me $100.
Right, right.
So often I might even shoot another plate or two just to for them to leave happy. But there's a lot of times where it's like, hey, this is who you are. You've got a lot of sun damage and you've got wrinkles and you can't, you look a little grumpy. It's like, well, that's who you are. So here it is.
There's definitely a lot of trust in this process between the photographer and the sitter, for sure.
Huge. It
Yeah.
is. It's a lot of responsibility, but man, I love it so much. It's magic happens all the time with people, and I know all wet plate photographers can relate. It's like every day when I have a client, it's like, is this going to be one of those ones? Uh, and so much of it really comes down to the individual. Often I'm like, boy, I got that picture yesterday. It was just powerful. And then today it's like, oh, they're not that great. They're just basic photos. It's like, well, what is it? It's not the technique. It's just the person and their eyes and their face. You know what I mean? But I love that because you know again, you never know when someone comes to you. They make an appointment and they show up and you're like, oh my God, look at their eyes, look at their hair. This is going to be amazing. You know what
Well,
I mean?
I guess, as you think about your sitters, what kind of person seeks out this type of photography to have their image taken?
Well, I live in a tourist town, so I get a lot of tourists that just sign up. And honestly, the majority of people don't really know what it's going to be. And I sell a lot of gift certificates. So people are like, well, we just got this gift certificate. And they leave like, what just happened? That was amazing. But they come in, they're kind of like, And I mean,
Yeah.
think about it, most people don't do a studio portrait anymore like Olin Mills or Sears. People just don't do that anymore.
Right.
And it's like, really? I'm going to get a studio portrait? And quite often, I mean, from my experience especially, it's usually like women love art and photography more. And so they're dragging the husband in or the kids, and they're kind of like, oh, no, I'll go because she wants it, but this is stupid. But at the end, usually it's the men that are like, 'cause I bring my clients in the dark room and I give a little talk on the history and then show them the lenses. And by the time they leave, it's like, that was awesome.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that's why I wanted to build a naturalized studio, because I learned that when I was downtown, like, wow, this is an experience. I didn't really see that. I just thought you're going to get this cool looking image through this old lens, but I started bringing them in the dark room, and they see the image come out of the cyanide, and people are like, "Whoa, what's that?" And all of a sudden, I realized this is more than just a portrait; it's an experience. So if I build a natural light studio that's big and fun inside, then to make it even more of an experience.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's always a pretty unique experience to bring somebody back into the dark room to let them see everything firsthand and realize that, hey, this is something special. This is not something that everybody gets the chance to experience, and you should consider yourself as seeing something that is very historic in nature. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and there's still not a lot of us, and it's still a rare thing, and yeah, I mean, I always tell them, that's like when I show them the image, I'm like, and they see the image develop, I'm like, that's why you have an iPhone, here it is, here's where it began, so people appreciate that. Wow, that's photography. This is how it started. It's like pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
Tim, I got to ask this question. So, what's up with the hat? It
what do
seems
you
like
mean?
there's a lot of hats in your images. Do people bring
Well,
those hats, or do you have them there in the studio?
no, I collected a bunch, and at the beginning, I was thinking, I'm going to be like the old time photo studio, and
Ah, okay.
that quickly changed for a couple of reasons. One was I kind of looked into getting all the clothes, but it was like really expensive, and I was like, do I really want to do that? And I was like, I really just love this process and just the final image. So I was like, I'm not going to advertise myself as an old time photo studio, even though a lot of people that call or come here, they kind of expect that. So, but hats are cool, and the thing I like about hats is, for one thing, yes, if you're wearing period correct clothing, it makes a tintype even that more amazing. So I do love people that come and dress that era. But what I really like about the hats is when you sit and you don't smile, sometimes that first image is like, oh, I mean, I just kind of look sort of serious. But when you put a hat on, all of a sudden you become this character. I mean, rather than just someone there not smiling, you're like this, you have this attitude.
Ah, okay.
And it really, and so often, sometimes people are like, I want a hat, but I would say most people don't wear a hat. But after the first plate, they'll see it, and I'll be there like, maybe put a hat on. And then they will. They're like, okay, now I love it. And then some people sit down and they love the tintype, how it is, and you shoot too, and they love it. But it's sort of sometimes it just sort of saves me in a way, like put a hat on and we're going to make you look better. And then they love it because, that first one of them, not smiling, and maybe they just, we're so self-conscious, and, oh, look at my wrinkles and look at my face and I look like a dork. And so hats are fun because they do bring that era into it, but it's also just makes people look like a character because they're not smiling. So
I love that.
yeah,
That's
you know.
awesome. My business is pork pie photography, and it's actually named after the pork pie hat. So,
Oh, cool. Love it. Nice.
okay, so Tim, there's very few people that shoot solely with natural light today. What are some of the changes in your technique that you had to make due to shooting primarily with natural light?
Well, first of all, I don't shoot primarily with natural light. I give the client the choice. I show them examples of both. And sometimes I just don't even give them the option of one or the other because I just look at them and feel what's going to be better for them. Sometimes maybe it's 4 or 5 people. It's like, well, you know, flash is going to be better because there's a couple of kids in there, and long exposure, 4 or 5 seconds with 5 people, someone's going to be blurry. And then we only have two chances, right? And then, okay, the second one, well, Billy Bob was still, but now Susie moved, and well, here's your two images. And it takes time. Even if you want to give them more, it's like, well, the hour's up, and that's
Right.
that. So I really, judge and decide what to do with each client. Now, I love the natural light. It's kind of my fave because when you get a really strong one in lighting and development and all that, it's just wow, it's just great. It's 5 seconds. It's kind of more of a recording. It's natural light. I love just the feeling of taking the hat off the lens and just counting rather than popping a flash. It's all very organic, and the client loves it too because they have to be still. It's kind of more of a challenge. So and again, I would say as a whole, I don't always get the strongest images with my natural light because it's a little more challenging to bounce light into them. You're just using natural light. And a lot of times people's skin, everybody's skin's different. Sometimes it lights perfectly and does the right thing. Sometimes it's like really dark on the other side of the window, and no matter what I do, I can't fill it in. And there's more UV light in North Sky than there is in my flashes. So you'll get way more of that aging redness, dark skin issue with
Right.
natural light. So sometimes I'll look at people's face like, no, I'm not going to do your natural light because you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
But I love it, and I kind of feel like I'm still learning and experimenting with it because it just takes time, and again, it's sort of I don't get the consistency with each individual person, and it's something I need to work on more too.
Yeah. Do you shoot primarily on trophy aluminum or do you do Ambrose?
I
Um,
do, yeah, I do the trophy aluminum
okay.
mostly. Yeah.
Yep.
Glass too. I'm starting to shoot more and more glass, which I love shooting glass, just because it's so fragile, and it's just neat. Other than the fragileness of them, that's probably I do tintypes more because I don't have to worry about shipping. I ship all my tintypes, and
Yep.
shipping glass is like, ugh. And all the effort, to shoot, an 8x10 piece of glass, and it comes out great. Everything it takes, and not like lighting it up on fire and varnishing and all that, and to have it break during shipping or something. I actually broke one of my favorite portraits of my son about 3 weeks ago, just like looking at it, and something happened and just broke it. Like, oh my gosh, I
Uh,
had it for like 6 years. Like, ugh. But anyway.
let's step away from the wet plate aspect for just a little bit. So you mentioned that you ship these images, and that's probably due to you've got a lot of out of town visitors that are coming in. What's your scanning and archival process look like?
Pretty much use mostly an Epson scanner, and I definitely scan each image because I send out proof for people to order prints, which is a big part of my business.
Okay.
I don't give away digital file. I don't give away prints. If they want a copy, they need to buy their print. And which works great because I shoot mostly my basic size is 5x7. It used to be 4x5. But they scan. They're so sharp that you blow these things up to 16x20 or whatever, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing how much
So
details in there.
yeah, so they look great blown up, and it's maybe an inexpensive way for someone to get a beautiful portrait because the other choice is, well, let's make a 16x20 tintype, and I can only do as big as 11x14, but let's face it, a 16x20 would you'd be charging $1,000 or $2,000 and
Yeah.
take a bunch of time, and I'd love to do that all the time, but you know the great thing about the smaller plates is they're so sharp, and you scan them and you can blow them up big and they look beautiful.
Great. Yeah, let's talk about gears. So, what kind of camera did you start out with versus maybe what you use today in wet plate?
Let's see. My first camera was a Norma, a Senior Norma, 4x5.
Okay.
And I think I got it off of eBay. And and it was great. I really liked it. But then I wanted something wooden just for the feel and look. So I got I think, Zone 6 4x5. And then shortly after that, I picked up a Can-Ham 5x7. And then I got a Zone 6 8x10. So I use the Can-Ham mostly because it can do 4x5 or 5x7. And I did have a full plate. My first vintage camera was a full plate. And I was using it, but the thing I learned about some of I have like two or three vintage cameras, but they're kind of rickety, and you know how crucial the focus is in the composition.
Oh yeah.
And I would pre-focus, and then when you put the plate in, or the holder in, it would shift the camera or something, or bump it out of focus, or shift the composition. And I was like, I'm just going to stick with the more modern view cameras because, there's so much, the gearing so tight and all that. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. I did have a 14 by 14 camera made by that Black Arts guy who was out of, I think, upstate New York. And he stopped about 5 or 6 years ago. It was probably one of the last cameras he made. But I just wanted the bigger camera, and I saw him, and It took like 6 months, but I have that camera too, and I also have a field 11 by 14.
Have you
That
shot
is
those
older.
larger format cameras, the 11 by 14 or the other one?
I've the one that Black Arts camera I've shot.
Yeah.
I've only done a handful of 11 by 14s, and they're amazing. And I have a Dahlmeyer 3A, and it's magic. But I've just been so busy that I haven't done it enough to where I'm really good at it. I think I'd probably be good at it now, but when I first got it, it was maybe my second year, and I wasn't even all that great and consistent at pouring 4x5s. And the test plates I made were just sort of messy, because you're trying to pour whatever, 100, whatever amount of ounces in this
Yeah.
huge plate, and if you don't flow it right, you're going to get lines and streaks and uneven development. But I just need to get my act together and start doing it more because I have such a great client base, and a lot of my clients want something more. And 11 by 14, I'll be charging like $500 for, so it'll be great financially. But mostly, just a plate size that big is just beautiful, and it's ready to frame. And they just and shut that how it is. The larger format, you even get that thinner and thinner depth of field. So it's that real dreamy, soft look.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to do more for sure.
What's the oldest piece of gear that you've got in use? Probably a lens, maybe.
Yep, I've got a bunch of lenses that are probably the oldest one is an 1859, 1860 Dahlmeyers. I have a 2B, I have a 3A. What else? I have some Voigtlanders. I've got a really decent lens collection because that's another thing I did during COVID when I was shut down. I started seeing how lenses were suddenly becoming way more expensive and harder to get. And so I went on sort of a lens buying spree. I was buying maybe one lens every couple months, but just got a bunch of large format lenses, just so I'd have them and they wouldn't be $2,000 in 2 years.
Right, right.
A lot of it I haven't even shot yet, but I've got a bunch of great glass now that's old, and I'm excited to spend some time with them. I don't even know what kind of image they render. There are different brands and all from Europe, but I'm pretty stoked. Pretty stoked to, yeah. That's the thing I love about this process is, I've been a photographer my whole life, and all of a sudden doing this put me right back to square one. And there's so much to learn and improve with, but there's also just so many other processes that I haven't even started to do. I want to do more glass or do some printing or um, just continue with how it evolved to other techniques. Dry plate, all that. I'd love to do some of that. So I just feel like okay, I'm 62, and the rest of my life I won't run out of things to do and try. So it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. Always keep learning, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Tim, if you had the chance to photograph anyone alive today, who would it be?
Kind of hard to say. I don't really have any celebrity or anything. I think it'd probably just be someone who just looks amazing. I don't even know how to explain that because it could be someone that's old or a child. I mean, just again, the eyes, the expression. So there's
Blue.
times I carry little gift certificates with me, and I'll just see someone, and I'll be locally in town. I'll be like, hey, you look amazing to me, and would you want to come and do a little trade? I'll get a portfolio piece out of it, and I'll give you a tintype, and they'll come up, and it'll be really, really awesome. So I do that. I do that a lot, just to be creative too, and
Are you,
also kind of the give.
yeah, that's
So
awesome.
it's fun.
Are you on the lookout for blue-eyed people with freckles?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, freckles for sure, right? Maybe not so much blue eyes because they can just get a little too bright, too light. But freckles are amazing, and just again, everybody's looks different when they get in front of a camera, and sometimes beautiful people don't look well, and sometimes people that maybe aren't so beautiful they look amazing. Sometimes it's just a moment, right? I mean, just you pull the hat off, and they just do a little subtle squint they could maybe never do again, but wow, look what happened. And that happens a lot too, right? I mean, sometimes you're shooting and you've got them in their pose and they look great, and you pull the hat off and they just change something. They raise their eyebrow or something happens, and it just makes the image. And it's like, try to do that again. Most likely not. And that's the special thing. It's like sometimes you get these images because of that moment in their expression that was just, you're not going to get it again. I've tried. I've brought people back like, remember we did that. We do it again. It just didn't. They can't do it. It's as simple as it seems. Like, hey, just relax and look into the camera. That sounds simple, but it's kind of neat that like even that, quite often, I would say more than often when I'm photographing, the two tintypes will never look the same. The expression will always be somewhat different.
Yeah, it's amazing how unique of a piece each tintype actually turns out to be.
So true.
Yep. Is there an idea maybe for a particular plate or even a series that you've got in mind that you haven't shot yet?
I want to do landscapes, and I've got most of the equipment. I have like one of the darkroom tents, and I want to do 11x14s, and find amazing light, which can be tricky here in Colorado because it's so sunny, and so often blue sky gets bright, and uh, ideally I want to find myself in just beautiful diffused weather, and find the right location, and just pull off some beautiful plates.
Have you been to the Crystal Mill yet?
No,
Yeah.
I have with slide film and stuff.
Yeah. That's
But,
that's one of the places that's on my list to try and
oh, nice.
haul all my gear and try and take
Wow.
some shots there. But it's a little bit of a haul for sure.
Yeah, but I've done a decent amount of location shooting with people in aspen forest and stuff, and I love it. I mean, when you're out there, and it's so challenging because you might have some wind and the temperature and everything that affects the plate, and you're making it right there, and that's just exciting when I'm shooting on location. I love that.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's using all your skills too, because you're outside, and you want good light, but you want to get good tones in their skin and movement and all that stuff. So it's I'm using every ounce of my 41 years of photography to create an image.
Nice. Tim, who are some of the photographers that you look up to or that inspire your work today?
Definitely a lot of wet plate photographers. And boy, I'm not sure if I can bring names up right away, but there's that guy out of I think it's Amsterdam. I'm sure you know his name. Uh, just does beautiful work, really neat, kind of creative poses, kind of a wild look, and his tones are great. All that. Yeah, I would say I follow a handful of wet plate photographers, and I'm sorry I can't think of names right now, but definitely pretty inspired. And as you probably know, it's great, but also a little scary how so many people are getting into it now. And so you're kind of seeing everything from not the best quality to really creative stuff. And so I kind of feed off of newer, younger people that are doing this too, and seeing how some of them are doing really, really well right off the bat. Like, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of the old school photographers, Ansel Adams and Jackson and what's the guy that did all the Native Americans?
Oh, Edward Curtis?
Yes,
Yeah.
Edward Curtis. And actually, his grandson lived up in Buena Vista, which is 30 miles from me. And after I opened my shop in Salida, he randomly came by, and he had been working on a project called Descendants, and he shot dry plate, which is what what's his name did.
Yeah, Edward. Yeah, Edward
Edward,
Curtis.
sorry.
Yeah.
And what he did was he researched to find the descendants of the people that Edward Curtis photographed, the grandchildren or whatever, maybe the great grandchildren, and he made a book out of all these Native Americans that were descendants of Edward Curtis's subjects, and made a book doing it. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, that's a neat idea.
And he lived right up in Buena Vista. I was like, how cool is this?
Hmm.
You know.
Did you get to take his portrait?
No, I don't. No, I didn't. And I was hoping to have more of a relationship with him too, but I think he moved or something happened. But I was really excited, like, wow. And actually, when I opened my store, because it was downtown, I like 4 or 5 times a year I'd find like a box in front of my door when I went there in the morning, and people will be like, "Oh, look at all these glass negatives and this old lens and these cameras. What are you gonna do with them? Give them the Tim Brown, that weird Photoshop downtown." And I got some beautiful stuff, even cameras and lenses and tons of glass plates that are local historic people and places that are actually a few are amazing photographs, amazing.
Man, you should have put in
And
like
all,
a bank Dropbox door there on the front
yeah,
door.
I do miss that. Now I'm up here, like nobody stops by and leaves cameras at my front door. But one cool thing that happened was, as I mentioned, I have a 11 by 14 field camera, again because Salida's a small town and I've been in photography forever, so people know me. Once I got into old stuff, people would find a camera and say, give it to Tim. But a person randomly on Facebook just forwarded like an 11 by 14 old vintage camera that was for sale, but it was in like Michigan, and it was probably their cousin or sister or something. So they just shared it with me, like maybe Tim would like this, and it was $100, and I talked to them, and they were like, yeah, 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 and they were like, oh, well, my husband's gonna be in Salida in 3 days. He's driving there, so we'll just deliver it. Well, it turns out that the camera was originally in Salida from this photographer that had this naturalized studio. It was his camera, and it ended up back to me in Salida.
Oh no! Wow.
And
That.
it needed bellows, so I just had those made last fall. So I'm ready to shoot with it. But it's kind of cool that it's like this, just the story it has.
Oh yeah, that's an amazing for piece of photographic equipment to make that journey back east and then come back home. So that's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
So I love that stuff like that, and I don't know, so many things like that happen in this world of, I don't know, wet plate and history. It's just there's always just cool little stories and little moments that happen with equipment or lenses or whatever. That's really neat.
Yeah. Tim, you had mentioned that there is a rise of people that are coming into the hobby now, whether they're looking at it as a hobby or maybe a full time kind of gig. But what kind of advice do you have for somebody that's kind of looking at wet plate? What would you tell the person that's thinking about getting into the process that would maybe make their journey a little easier?
Oh, nice. Well, first of all, be patient, because as we know that have experience, there's always something going to happen. I think the chemicals are huge. Put the time and effort into learning the chemistry and mix your own chemistry so you really will understand what goes right and wrong, and understand what's happening too. I guess technically too with the camera. I mean, for me, I've used cameras my whole life. So when I started, and I used to shoot 4x5 films, so those cameras weren't tricky to me. They were pretty easy to get to learn. But I would really say that the chemicals, and that's been my biggest challenge and my biggest reward to me is, I think, when I have a strong image, usually I get the lighting and the subject looks good, but it's the final step, and the most important step to me is having the proper balance of chemistry. You know, and I'm not a whole lot like, okay, this is historic, stick to the historic processes. I mean, I'm kind of that, but not 100%. So I'm not like, well, do it the way they did it back in the day. Experiment, have fun.
Yeah.
I do. One thing I have noticed with a decent amount of the newer photographers is a lot of them would the plate just is technically not that great with everything, with the exposure, the composition, the lighting, and especially the chemicals. But they'll be like, it's a tintype, it's amazing. And even their followers be like, oh, this is the best picture ever. And I'm like, oh my God, like, geez, look at it. The pore's horrible, and it's out of focus, and okay, you know. So in that sense, I think it'd be great for people to really learn the historic process first, get really good, get technically good, and then if you want to make it look messy or have lines, then back off. But I think, put the time and energy into learning it and doing it right. One thing I see a lot on like social media and Facebook and Instagram is people want to, learn the easy way. They'll buy the stuff, and then they'll have a problem, and they just want someone to tell them how to do it without even really understanding why. I get that a lot. I have people that will call me and they'll be like, or text me like, how did you take this image? What light did you use? What f-stop? You know, and what filter? And I'll be like, that's the Tim Brown filter. You know? Or I'll be like, how did you do this picture? I was like, it took me 41 years of photography. You
Yeah.
know, and I'll share. I'm not just, you know, I like to share and help, but also it's like, you know, you got to earn it too. You know, earn it. You know, learn it, and then you'll be better. You know, and it's really a. I see a lot of people, and there's a lot of copying going on in photography these days with everything, not just wet plate, but you know, photography. And it's like, be original, find your style. Don't ask me how I lit. Then your stuff will look like Tim Brown. You know, be yourself. You know, buy some lights and experiment and learn what they do, and then create your own style. You know.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it definitely today is much easier, I think, to get into this process. I did do an interview with Jody Ake a few days back, and I think about what it would have been like to try and learn this process in the late 90s
Whoa.
without having access to the internet and people that actually knew what they were doing. And you know, there's definitely people coming into it today have a very clear advantage over, you know, some of the veterans in the process.
Absolutely, and so many people are willing to help too. It's great, you know. It's you know like that Bastard Space and Facebook. That people are great there, and they will say, here's what I did. Here's what I did with the lighting and all that, you know. And so sometimes it just depends. Sometimes if I'm in the mood, I'll help somebody out, and I'm like, you know. And it's also, you know, you don't want to give away your trade secrets too. I mean, the last thing you want is somebody to copy the amazing style that took your whole life to do, and then they're, they're throwing it out there to their clients. I mean,
Right.
it's, you know, you want to protect yourself too.
Tim, how has social media changed the way that you do business? I mean, do you think about that when you're taking images like, oh, this is going to be a great shot to post up on Instagram, or is that just kind of a secondary thing for you?
Well, there's no doubt that Facebook and Instagram are 100%, well, I should know, 90% of my advertising. So it's really important. I don't create an image like I'm going to do this for Instagram, but, you know, just like we talked about earlier, it's like that amazing person comes in and wow, look at this image I got today. And that's all you need. Just throw it on there, you know. So often, you know, and you get followers and you get likes, and it's like, why did I get, you know, 500 likes on this one, and this one I loved, I got three. Like, what is going on, you know? But usually it's just the person. It really is. It just touches people, the way they look, the feeling, and it's something you can't really predict. So, you know, if I get a powerful image, I'll throw it on Instagram and hope it helps me out, you know. And again, I do set up stuff too, like I mentioned, how I invite models to trade, something I think would look great in a tintype. So that's I promote that way for sure. You know, I do freebies or trades again just to and maybe stylize some. You know, stylize and have them wear certain things or makeup and hair and get something really powerful that's gonna help my advertising.
Yeah. What about shooting outside of the studio? Do you do very many like pop up events or, you know,
I do.
special?
I'd like to do more too. It kind of depends on the season. I mean, my studio's pretty busy on the on season, so it's not worth it me to do pop ups because I'm giving up, you know, a bunch of business in my studio. But I like pop ups and I get a lot of calls for them, so I just kind of pick and choose, and they help me financially during the off season. I do weddings, which is really fun too, and I'm always shooting at least a half a dozen weddings a year. And more, I'm getting calls for all kinds of like more corporate events and stuff like that, and it's pretty neat the attention I've been getting, and really very lucrative. Uh, you know, corporate world wanted me to do work, but the problem is they'll see the image and they'll be like, "We want you to photograph, you know, 200 of our clients in 3 hours." Like, nope, not going to happen.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I won't get the business because once they find out, like, oh, you can only do 20, and then they want 100, it's like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
I had a few weddings. I had one wedding this year. They wanted 60 plates in 4 hours. And I
Wow.
was like, they wanted every wedding guest 10 times. And it was a really high end wedding at this ranch in this remote place down by Telluride. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I'd have to hire someone, and that's chemicals, and you know. So I threw a really high price at them, and they took it. I was like, oh no, you know. So I, oh yeah, actually had trained up my kid because they've learned wet plate just a little bit,
Ah,
and the process was neat how to do it. But we were doing like one every 5 minutes, and it was full on assembly line. You know I would develop it, then give it to them to wash and fix. And then they would they would fix it, wash, dry, varnish using heat and all that, and then give it to the person. So I only got to see maybe half of them, which kind of bummed me out because that's the negative. I never saw the image, and as a photographer, you want to at least see it. You won't,
oh yeah,
you know, but it was also okay, well, that paid my bills for a couple of months, so it was good. I
yeah,
don't know if I'd always want to do that, but sometimes you got to pay the bills, and it was really fun too. It was a really neat wedding, and the people loved it. It was a really cool event for sure.
yeah. I think as much as I would like to do something like that, it's removing the piece for me that is the most interesting is getting to spend some time with your sitter and you know develop this rapport with them and the trust that we've talked about and trying to capture a good image. But if it's just an assembly
Absolutely,
line kind of thing, it's hard to do that.
I totally agree. And yeah, and my dream. I mean, I'm kind of living my dream with what I do, but ultimately, if I had it my way, I would do nothing but 8x10s and 11x14s, and I'd shoot like one or two clients a day for you know a lot of money, and just really take my time. Not just two plates, but okay, we're gonna sit for 2 hours, and we're gonna shoot six plates, and they're gonna be amazing. But that's my goal anyway.
That's great. Tim, as we kind of wrap up here, give me a listing of all of your social media accounts and how people can reach out to you for getting a portrait, or maybe if they're going to be in Salida, they can look you up.
Excellent, thanks. Well, Instagram is probably where I put most of my effort into, and it's just Tim Brown Photography, and the same thing on Facebook. And that's kind of it. I have a website, salidatintype.com or timbrownphotography.com. And I even have a little page there of my color work and sort of my story and what I did before I got into wet plate. Yeah. And I would say one thing that's great about my business and the advertising end of it is because it's such a unique and rare thing that word of mouth really helps. I get every I'll have a client, a couple, a person come, and if it comes out great, they are like blown away by that and the experience. A lot of times the experience, they're like, I had no idea, and we are telling our friends. I mean, I have a bunch of families that like every time a friend comes or a relative, they get a tintype, and they've created a wall in their house of tintypes of all their besties and all their family.
Nice.
And so stuff like that, and again, it's just like regular photography. It's like, okay, well, my kid's older, I want to photograph him again. And I love the permanence of tintypes too, and that's something I push a lot with my clients. Not necessarily aside from the technique and the history, just like, hey, what a great way to invest in your family by creating a portrait that's this bomber thing on metal is going to be around for generations. I mean, no other photography is really doing that. Prints are going to fade and film fades, and even digital, who knows what's going to happen to that. But a tintype is a physical, tangible thing, and it's silver, and it's going to be around for a long time. And how cool is that to invest in your family a series of portraits that are just, you know, going to be around for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even if they don't end up with the great 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 grandkid in 500 years, it may end up in someone's house because wow, look at this person from 2020. Woo.
Right.
So it's cool to think that they're what the story of each of these tintypes is going to have moving forward is really neat.
That's awesome. Hey, Tim, thanks for joining me on 10 Questions. I'm glad that I got to sit down and learn a little bit more about you. And at some point here in the future, we're going to have to meet up and take some portraits. So please look me up if you're up north in Fort Collins.
I definitely will, and I'm sure we'll hook up some time and yeah, absolutely open invitation for you to come anytime and hang out and play in my studio.
Would love to check it out. Thanks, Tin.
Thanks, Chad.
Yep.
Cheers.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wet play journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 questions with any feedback. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests, and I look forward to you joining me again in the coming weeks for a new episode of 10 Questions.